We want to be able to take anyone who wants to go to the moon, anyone who wants to go to Mars, or anywhere in the solar system, and maybe beyond the solar system at some point. We want to be able to take you there. Not just a few astronauts. I mean, you, literally you.
That then is the vision, and people have bought into it already. They have invested heavily in SpaceX now that they've got a chance to do that. And Elon Musk has become a trillionaire. So it is time to talk about Elon Musk, about SpaceX, but also more widely about the impact of all of this on the American economy.
Americast from BBC News.
And to do that, I'm joined by Ryan Mack of the New York Times, who is a specialist in all of these areas. And Ryan, we should start with this word trillionaire and what it actually means. And has he actually got $1 trillion in the bank?
A trillionaire is someone with 13 figures in their net worth. We've never had anyone hit that level of wealth before. You asked, does he have that amount of money in his bank account? Technically, no. Most of that is in shares of SpaceX, which is not, easily liquid, but on paper, he has reached the mark of trillionaire.
And the point you make about the shares is important, isn't it? Because we should explain what has just happened and why he is now, at least on paper, so wealthy. So it was a private company, wasn't it, SpaceX? What has changed?
Yeah, so SpaceX has been a private company since its founding in 2002. And, recently, at the beginning of this year, the company decided we want to sell our shares to the public, allow people to own this company and have an IPO, an initial public offering. These are singular events in a company's history to raise, in this case, tens of billions of dollars. And that's what happened here. They sold their shares in the public market. The company went public. And the company raised about $75 billion in cash.
And I don't want to get too nerdy about this, but he's done it in a way, hasn't he, where Elon Musk keeps quite a lot of control.
Yes. Even after going public and selling shares to the world, he retains about 82% voting control over the company, a supermajority where he essentially is the sole decision maker of any major corporate decision. So he, even though people, around the world have shares in this thing, he's the one that makes and calls the shots.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because, number one, I don't know how unusual it is. Maybe you can tell us how unusual it is. But number two, if you're buying in, literally buying in, you're buying into his vision and his ability.
You are. And that's what you're betting on. And so he has kind of said, take it or leave it. You get me or you don't get anyone else. In terms of how unusual it is, there are companies in tech in the US that have arrangements where the CEO does have majority voting control. I think of something like Mark Zuckerberg at Meta, at Google as well. The executives there retain majority control. I would say what's unusual here is just the amount. It's so large, the 82%, that it's almost insurmountable. And there's a lot of speculation as to why that's the case. There's thoughts of potentially merging SpaceX with Tesla in the future, which, that amount of control would allow him to do that.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So not only are you buying into his vision, but you're buying into his future visions about which you know nothing. Indeed, he might not know anything at all, given what an unusual person he is, and we'll get to that in a second. But you are buying into the unknown, aren't you?
You are, and that's actually what SpaceX is sort of built upon. At least what it's selling to the public are these very fantastical concepts, and if they're achievable or if they get achieved, the company would probably be worth that much. But right now, these are just concepts. And some of the ideas that have been proposed as business plans include, building data centers in orbit, these AI data centers. Other ideas have been building a human colony on the moon. And then, of course, the kind of North Star mission of the company is to get people to Mars. And, all three of those ideas are just concepts on paper at this point.
Yeah. But concepts on paper, that have really taken off in people's minds, because the initial days of this offer and subscriptions to this offer have been a fantastic success, haven't they?
Yeah. So initially, the company raised $75 billion in its IPO. It later revised that number and said we actually sold extra shares and exercised this option that bankers have. So we actually raised $85 billion. The stock in the first couple of days of trading have shot up, so much so that the company surpassed tech giants like Amazon in terms of valuation. The stock's down a little bit on Wednesday, but what we're seeing here is just a lot of people wanting these shares, and part of that is because there's such a small amount of the company that is publicly traded. About 4%, a little more than 4% of the existing shares are publicly traded. So it maybe has created a bit of artificial demand here. But the stock has gone up and has performed decently well in its first couple of days of being a public company.
Are you still surprised, though, by that? I mean, you study these things, and you obviously studied the run-up to all of this. Is it still a surprise how successful it's been?
I don't think so. And I think largely because I think IPOs and the performance on the stock market should be measured in months' times, not days. I mean, because there was so much excitement, because there was so much hype around this stock, it's sort of expected that it would go up, and again, we talked about the small float of this company, the small amount of shares publicly traded. So there's all these factors in play here that have made it so that the stock would pop in its first couple of days of trading. The real test will be where the stock trades once employees and investors are allowed to sell their shares, something called the end of the lockup period, which will happen in a couple months' time. And that's really where the test will be, if these shares that come onto the market are able to sustain these, frankly, high prices.
Yeah, and nobody has pretended, least of all the man himself, Elon Musk himself, nobody is pretending that any of this is not without risk or is speculative or all the rest of it. They're all being pretty open about this, including Elon Musk. We ought to listen to him, actually. So this is a ceremony to mark the IPO in which he talked about his vision and indeed the past of SpaceX itself.
I give SpaceX less than a 10% chance of succeeding at all, to be clear. In fact, I told people this. I said, look, we're probably going to fail, but we should give it a try, because if we don't, if there's not a new company that enters space, we will never be a truly spacefaring civilization. While the other aerospace companies, they build good rockets and everything, they were simply not pursuing the technology that's necessary to make life multiplanetary, to make Star Trek, to make the exciting science fiction futures that we've read about real. We want to be able to take anyone who wants to go to the moon, anyone who wants to go to Mars, or anywhere in the solar system, and maybe beyond the solar system at some point. We want to be able to take you there. Not just a few astronauts. I mean you, literally you. If you watch, whoever you are watching this, SpaceX wants to be able to take you to the moon, take you to Mars, and ultimately beyond.
And could we say now that he's got the money to do it?
I don't know. Taking people to Mars is going to be quite expensive, but, and again, unproven. I look at that and I'm sort of torn. In some ways I can see why it's inspirational, and what SpaceX has done in terms of building these self-landing rockets or building satellite internet that's affordable is quite inspirational for a lot of folks, and they see these launches that happen. At the same time, he's talking about Mars there and what's possible. And, a couple of years ago, he was predicting that we'd be on Mars essentially by this time. And so when you're an investor, I don't know if you can invest just on inspiration. You should probably invest in financials and achievements and whether or not you hit your promises. And
yeah, but
that's kind of where the
You're being earthbound there, Ryan, quite properly, probably. And let me make it clear: well, neither of us are giving investment advice here, but there's something about the man himself. And I want to ask you specifically about him, Ryan, because often he's portrayed as a kind of Bond villain, Elon Musk. And you think of X and all the controversies about X and all the rest of it that he took over, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is something, it just seems to me, and I'm almost going to say uniquely American about him, because of the kind of sense that this is, all this striving is itself a wonderful thing. And it really genuinely doesn't matter to people if he fails. I don't know how they're going to feel if the money goes down the tubes as well. But there is this real sense, isn't there, of wanting him to succeed.
Yes, in some ways, there's something uniquely American to it. This idea of, coming to the U.S. and striving and achieving these, incredible dreams. Running two companies, building them up to trillion-dollar valuations, and becoming the, Horatio Alger, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of American success story. And so I think that's where a lot of people draw their inspiration from him. You mentioned the idea of him being a Bond villain earlier, but I think, there are, I don't know, I wouldn't say a majority, I don't know where the numbers pan out, but like there are a significant amount of people that see him as a hero and see him as someone who is advancing, American civilization or global civilization.
And also, you don't have to like him as a person. I suppose that's the other point. That there have been plenty of people who have driven the American dream, but have possibly not been terribly likable as individuals.
I think he's a complex character. Like on one hand, you can see the achievements. On the other hand, people have to understand, his involvement in politics and his constant tweeting and what he's saying online in terms of what he is fomenting. But I view him as a complex character.
Just a final thought about Elon Musk himself. Is it fair to say as well that not all of the companies have worked out? Because that's an important part of him, isn't it? This kind of risk taking. Not everything that he has tried to do has worked, has it?
Well, it's interesting. I think he has been, if you look at some of the things he has failed at his companies, for example, SpaceX with Mars. Let's take this current company that has IPO'd. Mars has been the North Star of SpaceX for basically since its founding. The idea of getting humans to Mars, making life multiplanetary. He has set a timeline for Mars that he has simply not achieved. If you look back at his statements, he has said, we get people to Mars by around this time. But while he has technically failed on that level, he has been able to replace the goal of Mars with other things and find other things for people to fixate on and be like, I've achieved these things in the meantime. And if you look at the current goals of the company, Mars has kind of been placed on the sideline. Now they're talking about orbital data centers and, factories on the moon and colonies on the moon. But in some ways, Musk's greatest trait is as a salesman. He's able to sell people on kind of the latest shiny goal and maybe get them to forget that he said these things or predicted these things that didn't come to fruition. And that has worked for him throughout his career.
Well, he certainly sold this IPO, hasn't he, to financial institutions. So we were saying earlier, a lot of people around the world are wanting to invest. But of course, big financial institutions and indeed Nasdaq, the actual exchange that is going to be quoted on, or it is now quoted on, even changed their rules, did they, to get it on?
Yeah, this was quite controversial, I guess, but the Nasdaq has an index called the Nasdaq 100, which people use to trade if you want to have an index fund. A lot of people with retirement funds invest in index funds so that they trace the developments of the U.S. economy, for example. And the Nasdaq 100 has certain rules that, in order to be listed, you have to abide by. One of them, for example, is you have to be a publicly listed company for a certain amount of time. You just can't immediately hit it after an IPO, or there's something called a cooling off period, allowing the stock to essentially find an equilibrium on the market so that there's not wild fluctuations in the price. Well, the Nasdaq 100 will relax a lot of these rules so that SpaceX could get into the index, specifically rules around timing. And that will then essentially put it into the index where these passive funds will essentially be forced to buy SpaceX because they trade using the parameters of the Nasdaq 100. And so what you're going to see in a couple weeks' time is a lot of these passive investors buying into the company, maybe unaware that they're investing in SpaceX because they're trading using indexes like the Nasdaq 100.
That's really interesting. So actually, even people who've made no conscious decision to buy into all of this are actually, through their pensions, if nothing else, are going to be bought into it. Everyone is tied up with Elon Musk on this now.
And to be fair, that's kind of the point of these index funds is like maybe you don't know that you're invested in Walmart, or you don't know you're invested in whatever oil company. But I think what's interesting here is just how many rules have been relaxed for SpaceX per the requests of the company. Like this was a strategic move that the company pursued, largely because they wanted to, more demand for the stock.
But if you're invested in Walmart or all the rest of them, that will be a relatively small part, presumably. The risk, I suppose, and this then brings us onto the wider picture as well. Mm-hmm. The risk is that, particularly with passive funds that pensions are invested in, et cetera, that actually a surprisingly large slice of those funds in the future is going to be taken up by SpaceX and by the other big companies that are also about to go public, Open AI and Anthropic, but there are others as well, aren't there?
Yeah. There are formulas to how, these passive funds invest via these index funds. It depends on the amount, again, of the float of the stock. Right now, SpaceX has a low float, so there's a little complexity there. But you're right in that we're about to see a large amount of IPO activity and fluctuation in the American stock market. You mentioned Anthropic and Open AI, which are considering IPOs. These are companies nearing $1 trillion in valuation. And if both of those companies happen this year, you'll get this kind of bonanza of IPO activity. You'll have SpaceX, Anthropic IPO, near $1 trillion companies that are about to go public. And that's really never happened before in history. So you'll get this kind of massive amount of tech activity, all involving, AI essentially.
That's really interesting that you say, just to emphasize, never before in history, this size of offering.
Yeah, the size of offering, the scale of these companies. I mean, $1 trillion market cap or valuation was unheard of as of a couple of years ago. And now you're having companies, 3 of them possibly going public at $1 trillion valuations. That's kind of astronomical. I guess it shows just how much interest there is in AI, how much potential investors see. And just, they believe there's appetite for these stocks.
Is that the other thing that's unusual, if not unique, though? When you say potential, these companies have huge valuations, but based very much on a promise of future profit.
I would say Anthropic and OpenAI have quite a different business proposition than a SpaceX. If you look at some of the reports of the business that those companies do, there are very solid and high revenues, extreme investments into AI infrastructure. But I guess investors can see paths to profitability given how much these companies are taking in. SpaceX is unique in that, the amount of investment it's doing into these kind of moonshots or Mars shots, if you will, sets it aside. OpenAI and Anthropic don't have rocket businesses. They're purely AI plays. But SpaceX is unique, and maybe that's why it inspires people, because, this is the only company that is saying it's going to get people to Mars.
And as you were saying right at the beginning, not just people, but data centers, which sort of links it all together, doesn't it? Because they all need data centers. We know, in fact, we did a recent episode on the sudden political fight back against data centers right around the United States.
Right.
And here's Elon Musk saying it's okay, we'll stick him in outer space. And if he manages to do it again, that's a sort of circular thing, isn't it? Which leads to profitability, increased profitability among all of these companies.
It's very Elon to play into this sentiment, right? That this anti kind of Earth-based data center sentiment. Ironically, particularly because his company has built two very large data centers in Memphis that have caused quite a bit of controversy. And so this idea behind orbital data centers is, look, we have constrained resources in terms of land, water, power on Earth. We'll solve all that by throwing these things up into orbit. Again, very conceptual. And to be fair, SpaceX is not the only company proposing this. Google has looked into it. There are some startups involved as well. Jeff Bezos has talked about it as well. But they've completely SpaceX has completely pivoted its goals to being essentially an AI company. There's AI part of this business was bolted on about a year ago. It was not in the company's plans. And now Elon Musk sees this as kind of a money driver, a means to revenue and profitability, even though it's just a concept. And so I think it'll be interesting to see how the company works towards this goal, whether or not it's able to achieve, this idea. There's a lot of physical limitations. It's a great idea to put data centers in space because of proximity to the sun and energy, but there are a lot of technical things that have not been proven out. And it'll be on them to, I guess, prove doubters and journalists like myself wrong.
What if it all goes wrong, Ryan? What happens to the US economy? How dependent is the US economy now on this sector, on these offerings, both the SpaceX one that we've now seen and the other ones that we've just been talking about that are in the offing? If it does, for some reason, go badly wrong, what happens?
I mean, AI is the primary growth driver of the U.S. economy at this point. Just look at how SpaceX has done on the stock market. It's kind of bonkers. The bear case for these companies is, let's take the bear case for SpaceX. It's not able to put data centers into space, or if they are, the cost of it are not any cheaper than building land-based data centers. That would significantly depress the valuation of the company. Like this is everything in terms of short-term goals that Elon Musk has bet the company on. He's been on a podcast saying that he thinks in 36 months the cheapest place to operate data centers essentially is in space in 36 months. So in 3 years, he believes AI data centers will be viable. So he's given himself this kind of timeline here and kind of boxed himself in. Will he hit it? It is kind of the big question. But if he doesn't, you may start to see a little wobble in the economy, or at least with SpaceX stock. I think of it that company as kind of separate from Open AI and Anthropic. But if these AI data centers aren't reliable, then you'll certainly see people that will start to doubt the company for sure.
And if you see that wobble, and it's a stock market wobble, what impact does that have on the wider economy? So, I mean, you say growth in America, and it's a simple fact, isn't it? The growth in America at the moment is hugely driven by all of this. Does it have an effect that you can see, that you can feel, that's tangible to people around the United States if it goes wrong?
Yeah, I think, look, we're not just talking about SpaceX either, or Anthropic or OpenAI. There are massively public companies that are pivoting their whole companies towards AI. I think of Meta, Google, Microsoft. These $1 trillion Apple, for example, $1 trillion companies that are betting this on being the future. And, the numbers have borne out and showed that, this AI technology is being adopted. There is certainly some use cases for it. But it is fundamentally shifting the economy. And so let's say in a couple of years' time that it is not, this AI boom is not everything we expect it to be, we may get a correction. Similar to what we saw with the dot-com bubble, for example. There's all this hype initially, all these companies going public, and then you get kind of this bust cycle. And out of that bust cycle, a couple companies figured out how to make the internet work as a business.
But that's fascinating. What you've just said is fascinating, is because you can think of that, and you can think way back to the building of the railways when there was boom and bust as well, wasn't there? So in the 19th century, they build all the railways and then they build too many and the business model isn't right and a lot of the companies go bust, but you still got the track. And with the internet, as you've just said, you still got the digital economy as it then became. So there is this, although there is this real fear, and you've set it out, that there could be a wobble and worse, and it could have an effect on the wider economy. There is something about all of this, isn't there, that just is that ability to lay down things that in the end change life, make economies more productive, etc., that is done in America to a greater extent than it's done elsewhere. I suppose you look at China now a bit and wonder whether they found a different model of doing the same thing, but elsewhere in the world not.
In terms of innovation, or
yes, in terms of innovation and the ability to take risks and then benefit from them?
Yeah, I would say, AI and China are certainly leading the AI race right now, and that's, what's driving a lot of the global economy. But yeah, I think I'm thinking back to your point on like boom and bust, right? And I guess at this point you're looking at what does success look like for you, and what's your time horizon. If it's short term, maybe you think some of these companies will not be as successful with AI development, and like your choice is, as an investor, is what horse are you betting on here? Are you betting on SpaceX and this vision of orbital data centers, or are you betting on Anthropic, which has this kind of vibrant AI coding business and large revenues and that kind of thing? Yeah. And what company do you see as successful in 5, 10, 15 years time? What's going to be the pets.com of the AI age that just kind of fizzles out?
That's a great open question, Ryan, on which to end. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Ryan Mack from the New York Times. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.